Hallå mina damer och herrar, varmt välkomna ska ni vara till ännu ett avsnitt av Säga Svär-podden med mig Ali Gorgi. Som ni ser är jag inte i min vanliga studio idag för att jag är på utflykt och intervjuar en väldigt speciell gäst. En gäst som jag inte haft någon liknande konversation med tidigare. Det är en professor i Stockholms Universitet och vi ska prata om konflikter i allmänhet och specifikt etniska konflikter, men även det vi kan se i våra gator här i Sverige som är territoriella konflikter och se om det finns något samband däremellan och psykologin bakom konflikter helt enkelt. Så jag är här i Stockholms Universitet just nu och riggat upp allting. Och den här konversationen kommer att vara på engelska. Så jag hoppas att ni pratar engelska. Om ni inte gör det så dela den till era engelsktalande vänner. Dela den i allmänhet, det hjälper kanalen. Och likea videon på YouTube, gå in på Spotify, ge oss 5 stjärnor där. Och kommentera vad ni tycker och tänker och håller med och inte håller med om. Och ni som har sett mig i podden förut, ni vet att jag kan vara skojig och skämtsam och sådär. Nu ska jag försöka vara så seriös jag kan och göra ett bra intryck och en bra intervju. Så som sagt, det blir på engelska. Låt oss välkomna våran gäst, Sabina.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Nice.
Good. Nice being here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did an introduction in Swedish, basically.
I gathered.
Yeah. So basically, where I just spoke about what we're gonna talk about today and where we are, because I have my normal studio.
Yeah.
But today we're visiting your house.
The psychology department. Yes.
Psychology department. Yeah. And you work here?
Yes, I have been working now here for almost 3 years.
Okay.
Yes, they recruited me. So.
Okay. So how did they found you? If you said they recruited you?
I have no ties to Sweden in any, historical, personal, or professional way. But as you said in your introduction, I work on intergroup conflict, in particular interethnic conflict, and I am in my research and my work trying to understand psychological processes that can help us resolve conflict, but also sustain conflict resolution. Because very often, even though we have resolved conflict over territory or other kinds of resources, it doesn't mean that peace, that formal resolution will result in genuine peace, right? So I'm looking at reconciliation processes, etc. But a long story short, this topic, as you probably rightly noticed and identified, is becoming more prominent and important in Sweden as well.
The
threat of conflict.
Yeah, you mean what were we calling?
Intergroup conflict.
Intergroup conflict.
And I mean that is interethnic conflict. It doesn't have to be of ethnic nature.
Okay.
You know, we can have different types of social conflict. But Sweden for a very long time has been a very homogeneous culture and society. Yeah. And the one advantage of that was that there was less of issues to deal with and address with. Now Sweden today is a very culturally heterogeneous, I would say more normal, more normal country in comparison to the rest of the world. But with that comes new challenges. Challenges of effective integration, prevention of conflict resolution, if there is a conflict, etc. So I think what this department, but also the government have correctly identified that we will need people. We will need researchers. I came initially as a researcher, as forskare, right? Yeah. To really to help. How can we use science and scientific research to understand this question of conflict? Okay. So this is how I ended up, and how this is my territory of investigation. I mean, I still work in other parts of the world, of course. Okay. But I have now added Sweden on the map of investigating these questions. Wow,
that's so cool for me to hear, actually. But how do you go on investigating or doing a research on these kind of topics?
I have my training and my background is in experimental psychology, so I mainly use experimental and quantitative kind of approaches to understand this.
Can you explain it for
it's very simple.
Dumb people? Or
it's actually very simple, and it's I can very often we would experimental would mean that, for example, I work with stories, right? So we would design, so we would control and we would design specific stories, and then we would randomly give those stories to random people to read them, right? And then we would measure what is an effect of having read that story? And these measures can be, and very often are, self-reported. So we ask people, how did it make you feel? What did you think? What would you do now after having read this story or not? So we are basically, the experimental design would include giving people a set of stories and another group of people giving different set of stories or no stories at all. And then we would ask them the same questions, right? So we would then kind of have what we would be investigating basically is the effect, for example, of reading a specific story or watching a specific movie or being exposed to a specific, what we call a stimuli, right? Yeah. And then we kind of measure people's responses, right, to that. So it's a very simple way. I'm simplifying it now. But I do have an experimental kind of background, but I work with real people. So I don't work in laboratories. I work in the field. Yeah. I work with people, and I work mainly with young people who live in conflict contexts or who live in contexts that have been affected or are threatened by conflict. So my background, I'm from Bosnia, and I survived the war. I was a refugee at one point of my life. And I then returned to a country that has been damaged by conflict, and it's still undergoing big transitions, like from conflict to peace, right? Yeah. Which is kind of a long process, a never-ending process. So that's where my work started. My work started at home. Okay. My work started at home in Bosnia, and then I expanded to the region, to the Balkans, right? Yeah, yeah. So I'm now working in the Balkans, and that has brought me, because I was very fortunate to meet a lot of great scholars and researchers, because I studied in the UK and in the US, and that has kind of enabled me to meet an amazing group of people. And then I expanded my context, and I work in Israel, in Palestine, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, Chile, so kind of all over the world. Now we are also doing some research in Pakistan. This is also a new field for me. Sweden as well, naturally, given that I'm here now. So we are kind of expanding and kind of trying to validate and trying to understand, is there something universal, you see? Because there is always something that is context specific, obviously, but we want to see if there's something that is kind of universally shared among how people think about others, how in conflict situations, independent whether it's in Pakistan, Bosnia, or Sweden, right? So this is where I am kind of in the field. Yes,
that's really interesting. So when doing this research, have you found some similarities behind all these conflicts, no matter where in the world they are? Yes, we have. And again, it's very important to kind of for your listeners as well, to kind of say that I am by no means, an expert on conflict and conflict resolution, because conflict is a very complex phenomenon, right? And I am a psychologist. So I only kind of approach it from a psychological angle. And what that really means, and a particular angle that we are looking at, is the angle of emotions, right? So that emotions are a kind of a subject area that has been primarily dominated in research by psychologists, right? Not so much by political scientists, anthropologists, etc. And what we are finding is that there are universal processes, emotional processes, in the way that very often people will feel angry in a similar situation, right? Independent whether the situation happens in Pakistan or in Palestine or in Bosnia or in Sweden, right? Sometimes very specific atrocities, if they are prolonged, can really produce and provoke strong emotions of hate as well, right? So these are universal kind of emotional responses to atrocities, to violence that people witness, to losses, to trauma and everything. So yes, of course they are. And and not only they are universal in that way, but they also provoke similar behaviors, right? So if we are angry, we will be more likely to want to attack the enemy or the one that has harmed us, right? If we are more hopeful, then we are more open, for example, to those who have
harmed us, despite having harmed us, if we are hopeful in the humanity, the peace, etc., etc. So they are definitely universal processes, but there are also very contextual, specific processes, and I think these are very important to account for as well, particularly when we think about interventions and what to do in the field, on the ground, to change the situation. In that moment, we really have to consider and account for the context in which we are about to intervene. Right?
So that's the history of the area and previous conflicts.
Exactly, that's the history of the area, but it's also the current conditions. You know, I mean, take Sweden, for example. You know, Sweden has, you know, a common, you know, cultural framework and a history, but within Sweden, there's so many nuances. You have communities that are very vulnerable, right, and segregated, and poor, you know, and then you have areas in the same country that are doing just fine, right? So we cannot have the same intervention in a way, right, in one type of community versus other, even if it's in the same cultural, historic context, right? So we have to really contextualize it to the level of communities in a way where people live, and operate on a daily basis. That is their context. That is their social, right? Their social context. So it's really, really important to kind of keep that in mind, right? Where are we intervening? Because that will determine the efficacy, right, of the outcomes. You know, that we want to see.
If we take Sweden, for example, from what I know, because I've interviewed some people that are active criminals, for example, in segregated areas, which is a upcoming problem here in Sweden, and what I feel and see from those areas that these kind of people are more likely to be in, they feel like they are in a separate society from the rest of society.
Exactly.
And they feel not included, and it's kind of their way of having revenge on the normal society, saying, okay, so you live this kind of way, we live this kind of way, and we don't cooperate.
Exactly, and you see that there is a missing link. There is no really a communication. There's no integration. You see, so it's really true that they feel that we live in a different world, right? You know, and it's so interesting. What I always found interesting is not just that people who live in the same country feel differently, is how when you look at the perspectives of both or more sides, they are not only different, but sometimes they're completely antagonistic. You know, the majority, you know, can have one perspective and think this is the problem and this is what needs to be done. And then when you investigate the minority perspective, they're saying completely different thing, you know. So this is the classic research on acculturation and integration. You know, the majority always wants the minorities to assimilate, right? And the minorities at the best want to integrate, not assimilate, because they don't want to give up their own background, their own culture, their own language, their own customs, right? So in the beginning, in the initial position, you have not opposite, but different goals, right? You know, the goal of assimilation or the goal of integration, right? And I'm not even bringing into the equation, you know, separation, etc. You know, I'm kind of putting forth some positive kind of...
You mean separation from the former country or
separation within, you know, like separation within the host country, right? Having your own independent, separated units, which is not very conducive to integration, right? Or to kind of effective society building, you know, a nation building. But what I'm trying to say is that basically you have very different perspectives, right? And you have sometimes different goals. And what this means is that it's really important to investigate, right? And communicate and understand both perspectives. Otherwise, we will never be successful.
No, that's true.
Otherwise, we will always kind of be in the area of like, oh, they don't understand us, they don't know what we mean, or misunderstanding, or simply inefficacy in what we are trying to do as a society. So yes, so it's very, very important to investigate, you know, perspectives.
Yes, exactly. It's actually the first time I hear this not conflict, but this difference of goals, where one side wants the assimilation and the other side wants integration. I've heard the words, but never in this like challenging context.
There's a lot of research on this. These are called acculturational strategies that has been done in the past in the UK. Sweden was not so culturally, as I said in the beginning, heterogeneous, for example, as United Kingdom was, right? Earlier. So a lot of research naturally on this, particularly in the European context, has been conducted in Britain. And there's a lot of evidence that shows these opposite kind of goals of what do we want, where are we going forward, and it's very informative and very relevant for Sweden today.
But have you seen some differences how Sweden approached this thing versus other countries, for example UK?
I think Sweden is still I don't know, so I don't want to now be, kind of, the judge of, of the strategies and efficacy of what Sweden is doing. But I think from an outside perspective and someone who is working on this, my sense is that Sweden is still trying to figure out the best way forward, because there are definitely issues, and threats to social cohesion, threats to trust, right, in institutions, which were very high not long ago, right, and still are moderately high when you compare it to other countries. So there's definitely Sweden is definitely facing a threat, right? Which doesn't mean that it will become a problem, but it's definitely an issue, a challenge, right? A challenge. So I think Swedish government with its institutions is still in the process of trying to find the best ways, the most effective ways forward. So it's hard to say whether certain things have worked or not necessarily, because it's a kind of a problem in its development. It's developing as we are speaking. So it's really. But on the other hand, my sense is that they are at least that the problem has been acknowledged, which is the first step. And an important step, because just there are many societies where very important issues are not even acknowledged as a problem, and they're kind of put under the carpet and kind of not dealt with, for different reasons. But at least in this country, my sense is the society has acknowledged the issues and they are attempting to address it effectively. Yeah,
funny that you say so, because when you say acknowledge it, and some societies, they put it under the carpet, for many years it was kind of taboo speaking about how migration is affecting Sweden, because people would be considered maybe racists, because they saying, hey, we have these immigrants acting differently, and that would be considered racist. So many people were afraid to speak up. And now some people have started speaking up, and they've been threatened, and and they had lost their jobs, etc. But after those who went forward in the beginning, after they lost their jobs, etc., they normalized it a little bit more.
I see.
Yeah, so now it's more open to talk about.
And I think it's important. I think it's very important. I don't think the strategy of not addressing the issue, personally, I don't think it's ever good. I come from a country, or from the Balkans, that has been witnessing decades and centuries of wars and conflicts, and one reason, not the only reason, but one reason why we have been witnessing reoccurrences of conflicts all the time in that part of Europe, has been that we have never effectively unpacked the history. It was always a little kind of pushed aside. Let's just forget what happened and move forward, and that's never good, because it's only a matter of a moment in history when the past will come in front of us and then attack us, in much worse shape than if we would have unpacked it in a more effective ways. So I think it's good. What I'm trying to say here, I think it's good that these issues are acknowledged publicly, and that we are speaking and voicing ourselves and our perspectives, and having a dialogue. I think that is important and good, and better than not too.
Of course, but I feel in some countries or areas of the world, war is more uncommon and maybe even not a thing that you could consider. While in other areas of the world, war is behind any corner,
Yes.
And for example, like Sweden now, it's impossible for me thinking about Sweden entering a war unless NATO or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm from Middle East, and then we have like Arabs which have like one kind of Islam belief, and some have other Islamic beliefs, and that could be a reason for war.
Yeah.
And to me, I wonder why is it easier for some parts of the world to take violence as an option instead of, like, for example, Sweden? I don't think Sweden would ever.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, do you understand the question?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, you know, there are some parts of the world that were more unfortunate, right? And there are some generations that have, you know, take Afghanistan, you know, take Palestine, you know, where you have generations that have never experienced anything but war. They have never seen anything else but violence. So that is their whole reality. That is the only reality that they know it can exist. So they don't even have an experience, right, of peace or of an alternative, right? So if you don't have that experience as an individual, if you don't have that experience as a group, as a collective, then it becomes, you know, you go for what you know, right? So, and it's really hard for us to imagine that, right? Maybe it's hard for us to imagine that as it is hard for them to imagine peace. It's hard for us to imagine war now, right?
Okay.
So it is really a reflection of our individual, but also collective. You know, we have collectives and societies who have been in protracted conflict for decades and decades, you know, on ends, which means generations and generations on end, right? So we need to keep that in mind. It's not that some people, I always resist this idea and this hypothesis that some people are just wired to be more violent.
Yeah.
You know, no, it's not. It's we would all be more violent.
Yeah.
If we would have grown up in a context and born during the war and lived only during the war, you know, and seen only bombs and harm and unfairness and injustice being perpetrated every day.
Yeah.
You know, so what else do you expect? You
True.
see, I find it miraculous that you have peacemakers, you know, young peacemakers in places like Afghanistan or Israel, Palestine, where they're actually expressing hope in humanity. I mean, that's beautiful, but that is remarkable.
Wow.
You see, that is remarkable that you have a young person, you know, who says, no, we can be friends. We can have peace, even though I don't know what peace is.
Yeah.
Even though I don't know, because I've never experienced it, you know.
Yeah.
So this is, we need to really kind of turn, you know, try to really shift and try to feel and think how it is for them to have grown up only in that type of environment.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I've heard that argument as well. Like, some people, they're just more prone to violence because they're like, I'm sorry to say this, but they're like Neanderthals, you know, or whatever.
No, I really resist that. Really resist that. But the thing that becomes true at one point is that when we use one form of behavior over and over again, and particularly if that form of behavior, like violence, helps us to survive, then of course we will go back to doing the same thing, even though it's not necessarily a good or a moral thing to do, right? But people will resort to the form of behavior like violence if it works for them, and at the same time if they don't know anything else, right? Like how to go about it. And this really calls for offering alternatives, offering skills, offering different types of experiences so that people can see that's not the only way of being. That's not the only way of surviving, you know, by being violent or by harming other or etc. But to blame certain individuals or groups that they are simply the way they are just because I really resist it. And I personally, you know, I have had in my life experiences of both war and peace. And that has really given me this perspective that both is possible.
Yeah.
So I never take peace for granted. I believe in peace and I do work on peace, definitely. But I never take peace for granted. And even now living in Sweden, I don't take it for granted. And we shouldn't take it for granted that this is how this will look like for forever on end, that we will continue to live in a peaceful society. No, not necessarily. We always have to make sure that we ensure the conditions for peace to be there.
Yeah.
It's never given.
No.
It's never given.
Yeah.
You know?
Growing up here, you feel like it is a given.
No, it's not. And again, I'm speaking from my own experience here, right? That it's not necessarily a given. And I think it's good to and it doesn't have to be, you know, I'm not saying this as a fearful message or anything.
No.
Like, oh my God, you know, let's be afraid. And no, I'm saying this as a message. Let's be grateful and make sure that we sustain this if this is what we want, right?
Yeah.
And kind of remind ourselves that peace is something we need to work for every day.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Because if you take it for granted, maybe at some point in time, some person thinks, I can harm this person. We're still gonna be in peaceful times, you know.
Exactly.
But maybe it bites one, you know, in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So when you started researching or when you started doing all of these things in Bosnia, was it also for you a way to find out how you could bring peace to where you came from?
Yes, definitely. I mean, my professional life and my question that I'm trying to understand in my own research is definitely personal. I mean, it's personal in the way, at least in the way of a choice. Like, what did you choose? What did I choose to investigate and devote my life to? And it was the question of peace. You know, as a young child, you know, who became refugee overnight, you know, I couldn't understand it. You know, I really could not understand that people could just all of a sudden start harming innocent civilians. Like for me, I remember when the war started and I was born in Sarajevo and I grew up in Sarajevo and the city was put under siege overnight and it started to be shelled, like what's happening in Ukraine right now. So exactly the same scenario, basically. So overnight you have a peaceful, you know, very well developed, you know, life, and then overnight it's not anymore, right? And I really, as a child, I could almost understand the concept of war, but for me it was something happening in the woods between two armies as a child. But I could not understand the concept of shelling buildings and hospitals and schools where children are going to school. That I couldn't understand. I really couldn't. Like, what did these kids do to be, you know, to deserve to be bombed? You know, and then I just couldn't. As a child at that time, I still can't, even though I'm an adult. You know,
it's pure evil, basically.
It's just pure, and I really could not. For me, it was really incomprehensible, and I really wanted to understand, like, how is it even possible? Like, what can drive people to do, you know, this type of violence? I could almost understand some type of violence, but not that type of violence. So I guess, you know, it was very the question was came to me from my own experience, and then it was very natural that I chose, you know, psychology in general, but then social psychology because I'm a social psychologist. Then in particular, and then this question of conflict, and then peace, and psychological processes that can facilitate peace, etc. So yes, it's very personal, you could say. So social psychology, could you explain it and what that is? Basically, it's psychology of group behavior, right? So how does an individual behave once he is or she or they are aware that they are a member of a social group, right? How is this awareness of belonging to social groups, whatever social group, ethnic, religious, gender, it doesn't matter. How is that awareness affecting your behavior? And how are you viewing and behaving towards others who you perceive as members of different social groups? So it's basically a behavior between individuals, right? But who are at the same time members of different social groups, right? And so basically that is in a simple explanation, what social psychology does.
And are there some basics to social psychology? Like, because I feel, I'm not an expert in any way or shape or form, but I feel like when you enter a group, it's like we human beings, we want to see as some kind of hierarchy.
There is definitely that. I mean, the basic is, what's the basic? The basic is that what we have found, right, is that our behavior and what we think and how we behave is influenced by our group membership. So we are not only acting in this world as individuals, as pure individuals.
Okay.
We always carry our social belonging. Sometimes it's national, sometimes it's racial, sometimes it's ethnic, religious, gender. It's there. Our social identities, right, are there, right, to a different extent, but they're there, and they affect our behavior, right? Sometimes, again, we're aware of this, we're not, and that is what's universal, right?
Okay.
So this importance of social groups, right, and membership in those groups, and then the question is, okay, once it's become important and determines our behavior, how does it determine our behavior, right? And very often we have conflict, right? Not always. We can also have positive forms of social of interactions between social groups. We can have cooperation. We can have peace building attempts, so it's not necessarily always negative, but often it is a negative expression of that behavior, like conflict, right? And then we are trying to see, okay, what are the ways to resolve it, and build more cooperative, peaceful relationships.
And what might be the reason for a conflict between two groups? Could it be anything, or?
Look, I mean, again, I'm simplifying this here.
Yes, thank
way
you.
Too much, just so we're clear.
Thank you. That's good.
But if we want to talk about universals, conflict in some shape or form, is always about resources. Look, and resources can mean many things. Sometimes it is territory.
Yeah.
Often it is territory in a way, but not always, right? Resources can also be a form or take a shape or a form of power, right? Or status, right? So there is always a fight, right? Or conflict over some form, right? Of resource that groups are competing for at the same time, right? So that is, in a way, of course, we have to specify it and contextualize it. I'm not saying every conflict is the same.
No, of course.
In nature. But if you want to kind of bring it over that, it is. And this is what we're witnessing right now in Europe as well as we speak. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the Balkans, what's happening in the Middle East. Access to resources. But then we also have now we are now doing a lot. Not me, but social psychologists are doing a lot of research now as well on power shifting as well. Sometimes conflicts can arise as well. Look, for example, what's happening in the US when people who have been on top have had power for a long time. Once that position is threatened now, by threatened meaning, well, there are now other people who also want and can be on top, right? So what is threatened there is not necessarily a territorial resource, right? But what's threatened there is your position.
Yeah.
And people are generally not motivated to give up power.
No.
To give up status, to give up territory. That's not how we work.
No.
So once you feel that your power is and your status is threatened, then you will make sure to keep it. And sometimes keeping it means entering into conflict.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the only way to keep it, but often that's how we try to maintain power and status.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's these are kind of the universal causes of conflict, if we can speak about that in that regard.
Yeah, but once again, now we're speaking about countries and governments, but I see the same, how do you say, the same mechanisms in like the conflicts we see in our neighborhoods around in Stockholm, you know?
Yeah.
It's somebody maybe trying to sell something in one area, and then somebody else comes to that area and sells something illegal. And then this first person needs to put the boundary and saying, you don't enter here, and that starts a conflict. So again, it's about a resource, which is money.
Yeah, status, power, hierarchies.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So it's the same, I see, even though it's a government.
Yeah.
But that's a weird thing, because as a government, you have the right to like start a conflict more than like a citizen.
Yeah.
So that's a weird how when you achieve some place in the world where you are so high up that you can order a military to enter another area, they do.
Yeah.
And
yes, and that, well, you can see it in two different ways. You know, when you have high status, powerful countries, right, with strong military, very often from these countries, like let's take US, right, we expect also help.
From that country?
From that, you know, from high-powered countries. You know, we expect help, we expect support. These countries usually devote a lot of money to international development, right? So there is some positive aspects. So we have some positive expectations from countries that have some degree of power, you know, and strength, and, you know, either military or financial, or, you know, for example, in Bosnia, it was the US who stopped the conflict, right? It was with US engagement, very assertive engagement under Bill Clinton, that basically brought peace and ended war in 1995 in Bosnia. So that was a good intervention, you see? So it was a very, that we expected and hoped for, because US is a big power with, you know, with these specific strengths. At the same time, you know, these countries also can and do intervene for their own sake, right? And for their own good and for their own interest and self-interest. And then we criticize, you know, rightly so, right? You know, these interventions. So it's what I'm trying to say, it's not easy being on top either.
No, of course.
Because expectations can go both ways, and criticism then can go both ways, right? So that is that comes with you know, with power comes responsibilities.
Exactly,
right?
They say so,
So this is kind of what no, it's not always executed as it's preached, but it definitely is true.
Yeah. So this is, if we take, for example, now Ukraine as the conflict that's going on there. Russians and Ukrainians, they're not exactly the same, but they share a lot of history together.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden they are kind of enemies. So the people growing up there, they will have a, like, as you in your experience, you had to flee your home country, and you will have maybe a specific experience that affects you and for your rest of your life. So how can you deal with that in a good, positive way? Because I guess if you had your home ruined, it will put like bad spots in your heart. It's
difficult, and it's almost never ending. Like, I was very fortunate. You know, I still survived the war. I still was a refugee. I lost members of my family, you know, during the war, you know, but I was still fortunate. I still consider myself fortunate because I survived, my parents survived, my brother survived, you know, so, because I know a lot of families who didn't survive. So I kind of see myself as fortunate. What I'm trying to say is every individual experience is unique, and every individual, and it ranges from to very severe traumas, right? But either way, it's a difficult process. So even if it's not necessarily the most severe trauma that one can experience, coming to terms with what has happened to you, but also what has happened to your country, and why, it's almost never ending. And I feel that it will never end, you see? So it's not like, oh, it's absolved now, or I'm done. Or I have put my past behind, and I have de-traumatized myself, and I'm okay now. I think the best we can do is really integrated in an effective way into who we are. And this is what I'm also trying to do. I'm trying to integrate my experience for the good, right? Yeah. That I, not just for the good for myself, but for the good for the world, you know. So I'm trying to use that to do something good in this world as well, you know. But it's very individual. It's very, very, very individual, and it's we cannot judge. You see, it's really hard to judge anyone, you know, going through this.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Is there, would you say, a good way if you have been directly affected by, like, if we go back to Sweden and neighborhoods here, I'm in a gang, for example, that's territorial, and I grew up with this group of people, and then one of my friends maybe got shot to death by another territorial group of people. And is there a way for me to not get deeper involved, would you say? Is there some good things that you could do or think about to not go deeper involved and retaliate?
It is a good question. It is a good question, because feeling, if that happens, what you just described, you know, feeling angry, you know, feeling a need to revenge, feeling sad by losing a friend, right? That these are very normal emotional responses, and that's okay, right? But if they are prolonged, if you are continuing to remain in your anger, that's not good. And it's not effective. So there's definitely, I would definitely advocate, right, for interventions that would help regulate these negative emotions, like anger, for example, or need to revenge, or sadness, right? Because it's never good, ultimately, to stay in a negative emotional state. It's okay to feel it, and very normal to feel it after, you know, the loss, for example, right? Or after an unfair loss, even more so, if you think this is completely unfair and unjust what has happened, right? And there are ways. I mean, one, you know, again, I'm simplifying this here, but one way, you know, in psychology that we use to regulate the emotions is what we call reappraisal, right? So basically engaging in the way, trying to look at what happened also from a different angle, or trying to interpret what has happened and why it has happened also from a different angle, because we always have our own, right? Which is only normal, but a natural response. But in expanding the interpretation of what has happened can help. If we try to understand why certain things have happened, why did he do what he has done, even though it's wrong, even though it has caused harm to me, right? I have lost someone as a consequence. Trying to understand doesn't mean that we have to agree, right? But trying to understand, will, you know, this type of reappraisal and changing the way we think will change the way we feel. Yeah,
but that's so hard.
It is.
If you're directly affected, it's really hard to understand. It's really hard,
but it's possible. There are interventions that target this, or trainings, right, that develop these skills, right? That will lead to reappraising, you know, situations and such.
But for Sweden, as an example, these trainings that you mentioned, should the government do these kind of things in the areas that are in a risky place, or should the individual take that responsibility?
Both. I mean, both. They're definitely, you know, there are definitely areas where governments and public institutions have to intervene in more systematic and strategic way. You know, individual based interventions are, you know, are limited in how much they can do, right? For the individual maybe, but not for the community. But if we're speaking about communities and people who live in highly vulnerable areas, who have no resources, no access to anything that they might need, definitely that's the responsibility of government, you know, and or respective institutions to intervene in more systematic ways with very specific interventions. You know? Again, I'm speaking from a psychological perspective. You know, this is a big issue. This involves a lot of different stakeholders.
Of course, yeah, financial.
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Sometimes the solution is in finances, right? Financial redistribution. Sometimes we don't need psychological, psychology-based interventions, you know. But again, I'm just speaking as what I can speak, you know, to the extent that I know.
No, because it's interesting. Group dynamics, they decide a lot of what people decide to do, you know. And for example, I know people that maybe they don't want to retaliate or go shoot somebody who shot his friends, but the group have those expectations. And as an individual, I feel like, I feel like I need to live up to what the group expect of me.
But there you go. You see what this is, social psychology example, prime example. How your behavior or our behavior is affected by group membership.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
So the pressure that you, even if it's not real, sometimes it's real pressure, but sometimes it's perceived pressure. Sometimes you think this is what they want me to do.
Yeah,
but it's
that's
not
true.
even real.
Yeah.
So just the idea, knowing that you belong to these groups, what the group values are, group expectations, they affect how you behave.
Yeah.
And that's right there, right? Social psychology in practice.
I know people who have said that to me, like, I feel the pressure of what people think and expect of me. And I need to live up to this kind of standards. And my choice or my, how do you say, the way I try to help them is I say, you need to go out from there, you know, leave the group and find a new environment and stay there for a while. So you feel when you're back, maybe you don't have the same expectations from the group and maybe you distance yourself.
No, that is sometimes also a good strategy, exactly, to try to, but it's not so easy.
No, it's not. Because you leave your habits and your personal identity, maybe.
Identity, exactly. Because it's part of your identity. Social group membership, to some extent, all of us are defined in our own identity, in our own, the way we look at ourselves, our own self-esteem is derived to some extent from group memberships. You know, so it's really hard to just leave that behind that quick and that easy.
Of course, And when we speak about identity, is that something that you actively shape, or your identity, or does it just come to you?
I mean, it is a process of, you know, of formation. Identity, it's definitely a process of identity formation. There are aspects of that process that we have no choice over. We never choose or have chosen where we will be born, to what family, circumstances, which country, right? All of this affect or will affect our identity ultimately, right? So there are definitely parts that we have no control over, that were given to us in that way, and then start to shape us, you know. But then there are parts in that process of formation that are very, very important as well, and that we can have control over. And that is, to some extent, our experiences and what we do. So our choices. What did we choose to do? Or what did we choose not to do? And that basically, that gives birth to different forms of experiences that can then have an influence on our identity. How do we think about ourselves? How do we feel about ourselves, etc.? So it's both.
It's both. Okay.
Chosen in a way, and controlled and not. Right?
So the behavioral part is more what we choose, how to behave, maybe.
Our choice is that's our power. Our power is in our choice, basically, right? You know, our power is limited to great extent, as I already mentioned, because there's so many aspects that we have no choice over. You know, not just in the history, but also right now. You know, many aspects of it. But we still have some power, and that power is the decisions we make. Right? Or the power is also in the way we choose to think about our life or think about a situation that has provoked certain emotion. That's what I talked about, reappraisal. That's also power. That's where we have a power to try to look at it from a different angle. We can do that. We can do that. It's our choice to do that. So there is some degree of power.
I'm curious to ask your opinion or your view on the recent Quran burnings that we see in Sweden.
In Sweden?
Yes.
Yes.
Because that's a area of conflict and creates conflict. Maybe not a necessary conflict, but it does create. And you, as a social psychologist, how do you see that, and what do you think about it?
I mean, it's to be fully honest with you, I have not thought to a great extent about, but I think it's an important question about the recent events.
Yeah.
But as a psychologist, I can understand that it can offend people, that it can hurt people. It doesn't mean that these things should be forbidden, right? Because under the premise of free speech, right, and expression, freedom of expression. But as a psychologist, I always try to understand, right? And as a psychologist, I can understand that, particularly because knowing that this is identity to some people, right?
Yeah.
This is identity to not just some groups of people, to some groups of individuals, but to some entire groups of people, right? So I think what's important here is to keep that in mind with every decision we make. Just because we can do something, rightly so, doesn't mean we should do something. Because every action has obviously consequences. And I think where intelligent response lies is by trying to consider all possible consequences before we take an action. And I think that's my expectation of high expectation of individuals, but also of societies. Let's really try to predict all possible consequences from an action that we are just about to do, such as burning the Quran, right? Without questioning whether that's allowed or not allowed, whether it should be allowed or not allowed, So that is all I can say without judging necessarily one side or the other. It's really that it's important. It's important. I think it's never enough to exercise understanding of the other side. We can always do more, and we can always understand more. And it's mutual. It goes both ways. It doesn't only refer as a demand to one specific side. So that is, Otherwise, we will always have these retaliations and these vicious cycles of revenge and conflict and misunderstanding and, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, to me, the whole situation with that, Quran burning, of course, I do stand-up comedy, so I know the importance of freedom of speech because I need to step on some toes sometimes to make funny jokes, right?
Yes.
But also I need to consider when and the context of my jokes.
Exactly.
So when I look at Swedish society, we already have so much problems that we need to solve, and we have like mass shootings, not mass shootings, but people are getting shot to death. We have bombings now. This is not typical Sweden. This is new to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is, we already brought police resources from other towns to Stockholm to calm everything down. And during this time, this guy decides to burn the Quran. I mean, for me, the thing that would make sense would be like, you know what, it is legal, you can do it, but we can't allow you right now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But you're contextualizing the action and trying to predict the consequences. And when you really do this, then maybe it's better not to.
Yeah. Come back next month. Let's see.
Exactly. So this is what we ought to do as a society.
Yeah.
We need to be like smarter.
Right.
Like smarter in navigating what to say, how to say it, when to say it, you know, and that is so delicate now, people at the same time, people are becoming more sensitive. Yeah. There's definitely more political correctness, that is also, I don't know if it's necessarily always good, because it really then shuts up people, and then we really don't know anymore, what we truly think. And I think that this high demand for political correctness can also kind of erase the space for dialogue. Yeah. Because we then become, we retract because we are afraid or sensitive to say something or to receive something, and then we polarize more, and then we have no space anymore for a dialogue, and I think that's not good either. So it's really I guess it's really difficult and challenging for all of us to navigate this balance. How do we balance, being saying things or doing things that are right, but without provoking conflict?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's
do you feel you have been affected by political correctness, like at your work? Do you feel like sometimes maybe I can't say this way?
No. I was fortunate for some reason. I have not been affected or in some shape or form. But it's definitely, and I think what helps me as well is my level of understanding, I think, and that really comes from my broad experience. I see this is the advantage I see from my lived experience.
Yeah.
My lived experience has really given me this multi-perspectivity, and I'm grateful for that, because that is really a helpful tool for me. I can communicate and understand diverse kinds of people. And diverse kinds of, because of the experience that I had, not because I am one way or another. No, it's been my experience that has allowed me this, and I'm grateful for that to some extent.
Yeah,
right?
I understand because it shapes us, our experiences.
Exactly,
of course.
Exactly.
So before we wrap up, I think when we spoke about UK earlier and the integration there, and Sweden and the integration that we have here, one thought that hit me was like Sweden. Maybe 40 years ago they didn't have so much immigrants.
Yeah.
And especially not immigrants from outside of Europe, maybe.
Yeah.
But UK had, because they've been colonizing. They had people from India, maybe from the Caribbean islands. So maybe they had a more slow process of integrating a few people, and then they got used to it, and then they could scale up.
Yeah.
But Sweden, I feel it came like a shock.
Yes, it was. yes.
Yeah.
And it's something like 20%, isn't it, of the entire population are recent immigrants.
Yeah.
So not just immigrants, but they're like recent immigrants.
Since 2015,
which is a shock to any system.
Yes.
It would be a shock to any system, not just Sweden, right?
Of course.
So definitely this integration is a process.
Yeah.
It requires time.
Yes.
So we cannot expect over 5 years, 10 years to have a fully integrated, well-integrated society, right? So there's definitely a lot of work.
Yeah,
definitely a lot of work. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, and I trust that this society will do well and will make the right decisions. I don't know why. Don't ask me why, but I'm hopeful when it comes to Sweden.
Do you get any requests of doing research about the immigration in Sweden or integration?
I actually am working on, as we speak. I am actually working on a project that is funded by the Swedish Research Council on working with a Swedish perception or perceptions of Swedes who have been born and in Sweden, and how they perceive the immigrants, the recent immigrants from the Middle East. And I am trying to see, to determine the level of prejudice, right? And most importantly, that's what I am most interested in trying to find ways of how we can reduce the prejudice, right? So I am actually working as we speak on this relationship between new immigrants and Swedes, Swedish people who have been born here and basically grew up here and didn't know anything else except Sweden, right? So that is what we're working on now, and we're working with some interventions, social psychological interventions, and particularly there we're working with stories and storytelling, and because it's very important, particularly when it comes to media. How do we represent those that we don't know much about? Right? So we don't know. And when we don't know people or cultures, we tend to avoid, we tend to be distant, we tend to not maybe trust them. And then what is the source of information we get about them? It's media, schools, etc. If it's not direct contact. And if we have communities where, people here don't have friends from all, from immigrant groups, so they don't have experience, you know. So it's really these, how do we, representations of them, right? And what we are trying to basically see is what type of stories would be more effective for reducing levels of prejudice, right?
But these stories, do you write them or?
We have an intervention that we have developed before I moved to Sweden with my colleagues from Poland, Warsaw University, and we developed this intervention that is called the moral exemplar intervention. And basically this intervention is simple. It's about real stories, so not fictional stories, real stories about individuals who have risked their life to save the life of another human being. And we have a lot of these stories. These are the so-called moral exemplars. So individuals who have done something right. And not only did something right, like helping somebody, like a person from the Middle East who recently, immigrated to Sweden from Syria, and there was a situation, and he, where a Swedish woman was just about to be hit by a car, and he basically grabbed her and moved her from the street by risking that he could have gotten hit by that car, So he did the right thing, like he helped, but not only did he help, he took risks. And that is, these two components is what make this moral exemplar intervention effective, right? It's not just about helping, because there's a lot of work on helping, and if we learn about them helping, is this really going to change how we think about them? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? But this risk-taking is a very important element in this intervention. So we're testing these stories here in Sweden now, and we are finding that they're working. So people get really like, oh my God, I had no idea, right? So they're individual stories, but what they do is when they read 3 of such stories from a male, 22 years old, from Syria, lives in Sweden, that has done this, this, and that. And that's it, right? So I'm simplifying again. Their perception, not of these individuals, but of all immigrants who come from Syria, has changed.
Wow.
And that's what we want to see. So we are trying to really kind of, change the generalized view of an out group, in this case, an immigrant group, right? Through these stories, right? And this is what we're working on as we speak.
Yeah, that's cool. But I can feel it's a huge challenge for you guys, because media, they show the other side, the bad side, because that's what generates clicks. And
Exactly. But this can also generate clicks. I'm just here to sell the intervention, but it can, because we have evidence that people love reading these stories, and they find them extremely inspirational. And they're not like, oh my God, here's another story. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea. So there is an element of surprise. There is an element of awe, and inspiration that people derive from this. So they can potentially be effective even in media, because they could generate clicks.
That's cool,
because they are moving in a way, right? So this is what we're doing right now as we speak. But we will continue with our research. We're writing projects and grants as we speak, seeking money and funding, because research costs, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
So my goal is really to expand this beyond several research projects and make it really a sustained program of research on intergroup relations. The first one in Sweden, of that kind. So that would be my goal.
Cool. How far have you come with this project?
We are now in our 2 years. We've been working on this for 2 years. It's a 4-year funded project, and also working on some other applications on trying to see how intergroup contact works in Sweden, and what forms of contact people have with each other, and what forms of contact are beneficial and maybe less beneficial. But also depending on where people live, because it's not, as I said in the beginning, it's not that simple, right? It really matters where you live,
of course,
right? Where you're surrounded with, what you're surrounded with. So this is something that I also want to investigate in the future as well.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges ahead, especially when integrating these two different worlds.
Exactly.
And I guess it's not easy. So I hope your research finds some ways.
Thank you.
We have our hopes in you, Sabina.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
For how long you been in Sweden now?
Almost 3 years. Well,
3 years,
3 years I've been working at SU, but I moved. It was a pandemic when I started. It coincided with everything.
Yeah.
So we moved a little later.
Okay.
We couldn't move right away. So 2 years or so
and
we've been.
You enjoy?
Physically. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I do. Yes.
That's
I mean,
good.
it's difficult not to like. I live in Stockholm.
Yes.
So it's really difficult not to like Stockholm.
Yeah.
There's something beautiful about the city.
Yeah. It is.
Something and something I find something open as well, and I like it. I like it.
That's cool. Yes. Have you noticed something specific for Swedes, that specific behavior, like, oh, this is typical Swedish or something like that?
In general, if I have to generalize I shouldn't generalize, but let me generalize. I generally like Swedes.
Yes.
I like Swedes a lot. I find them little shy. Little shy. But at the same time, what I like about that or about them is when they meet a person who is not shy, like, for example, me. Who can talk a lot and who can be also a little loud and, open and, very expressive.
Yes.
They're okay with that.
Yeah.
So they almost like it quietly. Like there's some quiet admiration of like, it's not like they resist it.
No.
It's not that they're like, oh, no, this is like you're too much for us.
No,
No, they actually like it. They're not, they wish they could be.
Yeah. I can see that.
And I kind of, I think it's very adorable and very, very, very cute. So there's, my stereotypes are still very positive,
that's good,
when it comes to Swedes.
Yeah, that's good. I make a lot of jokes about stereotypes. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so many. They love it. When they hear it, like I talk about how we immigrants are, how people from the, we call it ghettos, how we are versus how typical Swedes are. They love these kind of jokes, So that's funny. Okay, Sabina, so thank you so much for this interview.
My pleasure.
It was
my pleasure. I hope that your listeners, I'm sorry that we had to do this in English.
No, it's fine.
But
I think I have a few more in English in the future, so they need to get used to it. Hopefully, I hope my English was good.
But another thing, your English was perfect. But another thing is, and what I find Swedish English, I mean, the English language here, the proficiency is incredible.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. But maybe it's because Swedish is a small language generally.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah.
But still, I've lived in many parts of the world, and here pretty much everybody.
Yeah, everybody, yeah.
Pretty much everybody.
Old, young,
it doesn't matter. They speak English, and I find it, and they like it.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have this resistance to like, no, I'm not going to speak. They actually, even when I will never learn Swedish. And one reason why I will never learn Swedish because the Swedes love speaking English to me.
Yes.
So even when I attempt, they're like, no, it's okay. Yeah. They almost want to show off a little bit. And, and then I'm like, all right, here we go.
It's not like Italy, Spain, or France where no, we speak French here. No, it's the way around here.
So, and I like that. I really like that. They're very, there's some openness.
Yes. But if you stay here for 15 years and you keep speaking English, maybe then you get some. Maybe then they're gonna ask questions.
Like, okay, this is
Okay. So thank you so much, Sabina, for this interview.
My pleasure.
Thank you a lot. And maybe in the future, when your research is done, we can link up again. And we see what you found out.
Yeah, exactly. Good.
Thank you a lot. Och för alla ni som har lyssnat, jag hoppas ni gillade det här avsnittet. Det var lite utmanande för mig med engelskan och allting, men jag hoppas att ni fann vissa goda delar i det ni fick höra. Och som vanligt, likea avsnittet, gå in på Spotify, klicka på play även där, det pumpar upp oss i algoritmerna. Och ge oss 5 stjärnor på Spotify och kommentera på YouTube vad ni tycker, tänker, vad ni håller med om, inte håller med om. Och dela gärna om ni vill, så hörs vi nästa gång. Ha det bra.